Meeting my ex-girlfriend Sarah's family during the holidays was the worst weekend I had ever experienced. Her family lived in a different state, far from Sarah and me. We were in Long Island, New York, while they were in Vermont. Our relationship was relatively new, but she thought it was serious enough to invite me to spend Christmas with her family. Her family was very small, so the gathering was just going to be Sarah, her brother, her parents, and me. When we arrived at the house, I was taken aback. The house was beautiful, sitting on a large, well-kept property, secluded from any nearby houses. As Sarah and I stepped out of the truck, her parents came out to the porch to greet us. At first, they left a strange impression. They seemed friendly, but in an oddly unnatural way. Her father didn't smile, but he shook my hand, patted me on the back, and said he was happy to meet me. Her mother, on the other hand, hugged me with an exaggerated show of emotion. But there was something unsettling about her face. Her smile was unnaturally wide, almost to the point of being creepy. The inside of the house was just as beautiful as the outside, with a cozy wooden lodge-like vibe. Shortly after, I met Sarah's brother, Paul, who had just come home from work. He was an awkward guy with an old-fashioned bowl cut and a full tattoo sleeve running up his arm. We had dinner, which was awkward at times, but otherwise relatively normal. After dinner, we gathered in the living room to watch a Christmas movie. I tried to avoid making eye contact with Paul, but I could feel him staring at me for extended periods on multiple occasions. At one point, I finally looked back at him, and our eyes locked for about 3 seconds before he turned back to the TV. His stare was judgmental and intense, which only made me feel more uncomfortable. At the end of the night, Sarah and I were in the guest room, which had an attached bathroom. She went into the bathroom, leaving her phone on the nightstand. I noticed a new text message from her mom. Out of curiosity, I got up to read it. The message was completely unexpected and changed the entire tone of the night. The text read, "Do you think he suspects anything yet?" Before I could process it further, the notification disappeared, replaced by a new one, probably due to her phone's notification settings. Her phone was set to hide notifications once it locked. At exactly 3:01 a.m., I wanted to read what had been said before, but her phone was locked with a password. My heart was pounding as Sarah came back into the room. I gave her the cold shoulder because my mind was racing with suspicions. She seemed to notice, but didn't pay much attention. She sat there texting on her phone for a while before turning off the lamp and going to sleep. I couldn't sleep, though. I kept tossing and turning for hours, preoccupied with what that text could have meant. Was it about me? And what was going on with her brother? At exactly 2 a.m., I heard Sarah quietly get out of bed. Normally, I would have found this considerate, but under the circumstances, it felt suspicious. I didn't move and pretended to still be asleep. I could feel her standing by my side of the bed for a few moments before she left the room and headed downstairs. Then I heard someone else going downstairs, followed by another person. Something strange was going on. I quietly crept to the top of the stairs to listen to what was happening below. I could hear muffled voices speaking in low tones as if they were planning something. I heard Sarah say, "When I go back upstairs, you'll stand by the door." Then her brother responded, though I couldn't make out his words. At that moment, I felt the horrifying realization of what might be happening. I quickly went back to the room to grab my things and leave. As I picked up my keys, I noticed something in the corner of the room. I turned on the lamp and was shocked to see Sarah's father sitting in a chair, staring at me with a blank expression behind his glasses. I screamed, "You're all insane!" At least 4 times as I ran to my car. I started the engine and floored it, barely giving the car time to fully start before speeding down the long driveway. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station. There, I checked my phone and saw a text from Sarah saying, "What the hell happened?" I didn't respond immediately, but when I got home I replied, "I don't know what you and your twisted family were planning, and I don't want to know. Don't ever contact me or come near me again, and I won't report this." She never replied, and I didn't try to find out why. It was Christmas Eve in the Vermont countryside, wrapped in a unique magic. The roads were blanketed in white snow, trees adorned with a layer of glistening ice, and holiday lights twinkled faintly in the distance. I was driving from Burlington to a small town called Stowe to spend the holiday with my girlfriend and her family. The trip seemed straightforward, just 2 hours on familiar roads. But what began as an ordinary journey turned into a nightmare I would never forget. The snow had been falling since the morning, and by the time I left, the roads were slippery and visibility was reduced to just a few meters. I considered postponing the trip, but decided to push ahead, believing that cautious driving and following snowplows would suffice. As time passed, the holiday lights gradually faded, leaving the road dark and deserted. About 40 minutes in, I noticed a car behind me, tailing me closely. Its headlights were unnervingly bright, nearly blinding me through the rearview mirror. No matter how much I adjusted my speed, the car stayed uncomfortably close. After a few miles, the car suddenly swerved into the opposite lane, sped past me, and vanished into the darkness. I breathed a sigh of relief and tried to focus on driving through the storm. But 10 minutes later, the same car reappeared. It was parked by the roadside, its hazard lights flashing. Next to it stood someone waving their arms desperately. I slowed down, trying to decide whether to stop. They might have needed help, but it was a freezing night, and something about the scene felt off. The person wasn't dressed for the cold, and their movements were jittery and strange. I chose to ignore them and drive on. As I passed the car, the person suddenly darted into the road, waving their arms hysterically. I swerved to avoid hitting them, barely avoiding a skid. My heart raced as I glanced in the rearview mirror. They stood in the middle of the road, watching as I drove away. The storm intensified as I continued, and visibility became nearly non-existent. Suddenly, the car's headlights appeared behind me again, tailing me aggressively. I cautiously increased my speed to avoid losing control on the icy road, but the car kept pursuing me. It felt as if I was trapped in a dangerous game with no escape. Eventually, the car disappeared again, leaving me drained and anxious. As I neared Stowe, the road narrowed and wound through dense trees, with snow falling heavily. That's when I saw something blocking the road. A large tree branch stretched across both lanes. I stopped and turned on my hazard lights. My heart pounded as I stepped out to inspect the situation. As I approached the branch to move it aside, I heard a sound in the nearby woods. It was faint footsteps, deliberate but unmistakable, drawing closer. I froze, aiming my flashlight at the trees, but saw nothing except shadows and swirling snow. I hurried back to my car, locking the doors tightly, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I continued driving, convincing myself that the sound was just an animal. Less than a mile later, my breath caught in my throat. There, in the middle of the road, was the same car that had been chasing me, parked in a way that blocked the path. There was no sign of anyone inside. The narrow road and deep snowbanks made turning around impossible. I honked, hoping someone would come out to move the car, but there was no response. I honked again, louder this time, but the silence was deafening. Then I noticed movement among the trees. A figure in dark clothing, face hidden under a hood, was slowly walking toward my car. Their steps were steady, and their calm demeanor was terrifying. Gathering all my courage, I pressed the gas pedal, attempting to squeeze through a narrow gap between the car and the snow. My tires slipped briefly, but I managed to push through. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw the figure standing in the middle of the road, silently watching me as I drove away. When I finally reached Stowe, I was exhausted and shaken. I parked in front of my girlfriend's house and sat there for a while, trying to process what had happened. I never shared the full story with anyone. I didn't want to spoil the holiday spirit, but that cold, terrifying night will remain etched in my memory forever. Four years ago, I decided to drive across the country to visit my family for Christmas. My parents lived in a modestly sized house, and whenever we gathered, we would sleep on couches or in spare rooms, so I didn't bother booking a hotel. I started my journey on the morning of December 25th, expecting to arrive at my family's house by evening. The drive was long, about 10 hours, but I thought stopping halfway would be a waste of time. I was eager to get there before dinner. At first, the snow fell lightly, making the roads a bit slippery. It wasn't too bad, but the slow traffic was frustrating. After a few hours, the weather suddenly shifted from light snowfall to a fierce snowstorm. The wind howled and visibility became almost non-existent. I saw other cars pulling over to the side of the road, seeking shelter, but I was determined to keep going. I was so close to my family's house, and I convinced myself the storm would pass soon. However, as the storm intensified, I began sliding on hidden patches of ice. I realized continuing was no longer an option. I spotted a small hotel, its flickering lights a beacon in the heart of the storm. I pulled in and booked a room. By the time I got to my room, it was past 8 p.m. I set my alarm for 11 p.m., intending to check the weather and resume my journey if the storm had calmed down. I lay down on the bed, exhausted, and soon drifted off to sleep. When I opened my eyes, I immediately felt that something was off. The room was dark, and my phone showed it was 2 a.m. The alarm hadn't gone off. I sat up quickly, a chill running down my spine. I could hear the wind outside, but it sounded less intense. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. Most of the cars were gone, with only a few remaining. I went back to bed trying to relax, but an uneasy feeling was growing inside me. I felt a cold draft in the room, as if the wind had found its way inside. I got up and looked around, and that's when I noticed the window at the foot of the bed was slightly open. I was sure it had been closed when I went to sleep. I shut it quickly, my heart racing. I searched the room for anything out of place. When I reached the door, I discovered the locks were undone. That was impossible. I had locked them myself when I entered. Panic set in, and my mind raced. The only person who could have unlocked the door from the inside was someone who had entered while I was asleep. I locked the door again, my hands trembling. Then I heard it. The sound of the door handle moving, followed by a slight jiggle. I froze in place. Someone was trying to get in. The movement stopped, but I could feel the tension hanging in the air. I slowly approached the door and looked through the peephole. What I saw made my blood run cold. A man was standing outside, his face alarmingly close to the door, as if he was listening. My heart felt like it was about to burst. I backed away silently, pressing my back against the wall, holding my breath and praying he wouldn't hear me. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, then suddenly turned and walked away. I didn't think twice. I grabbed my bag, threw on my coat, and bolted from the room. I didn't look back. I jumped into my car and drove off as fast as I could, ignoring the heavy snow that had started falling again. I arrived at my family's house after a long and grueling drive. Since that night, I haven't been able to forget what happened. That man had definitely been in my room waiting for me to fall asleep. I don't know what he had planned, and I probably never will. But I know that if I hadn't woken up when I did, I might never have made it to my family. Now, every time I stay in a hotel, I double-check the locks and windows, wondering if the fear will ever come back to haunt me again. In a small town called Winter Hill, the atmosphere of Christmas always brought a special charm. White snow covered everything, colorful lights decorated houses, and people walked the streets singing festive songs. But in December of that year, darkness descended on the town in a way no one had expected. On the night of December 24th, 5 children, Jimmy, Lucy, Peter, Emily, and Thomas, decided to embark on an adventure. They had heard rumors about an abandoned house on the outskirts of town, a house known as the Johnson House. It was said that the family who had lived there disappeared on Christmas Eve decades ago, never to be seen again. Local tales claimed the house was haunted, but the children, driven by their youthful curiosity, decided to explore it. "We won't be scared, it's just old stories," Jimmy declared, holding an old lantern while the others reluctantly followed him. When they reached the house, they noticed that the surrounding trees were strangely barren, as if lifeless. The windows were broken and the main wooden door was dilapidated, but ajar. Inside, they were met with a strong smell of mildew, and the walls were covered with deep cracks. The creaking of the wooden floors echoed under their feet with every step. As they explored the place, they noticed something strange in the main room. A Christmas tree stood in the middle, adorned with old faded decorations, and beneath it was a single large gift box. "Who put this tree here?" Lucy asked cautiously as she approached. A card was attached to the box with wobbly handwriting. "Open me." They hesitated for a moment, but Thomas said, "It's just a game. Let's open it and see what's inside." When they opened the box, they found a large wooden doll dressed as Santa Claus, but the doll's face was unsettling. Its painted smile was unnaturally wide, and its eyes seemed to follow them. Suddenly, the lights went out, and they heard a faint voice singing a Christmas carol. "Silent night, holy night." The children froze in place. Jimmy tried to relight his lantern, but the glow was weak. They began hearing muffled laughter, as if it was coming from all around them. Then the doll started to move. It slowly raised its hand and pointed toward a dark hallway leading to the basement. "We need to get out of here," Emily screamed. But the main door was tightly shut, as if an invisible force was holding it closed. The sound of heavy footsteps began to descend from upstairs, as if someone was slowly coming down the stairs. With no other choice, the children decided to follow the hallway the doll had pointed to. The staircase leading to the basement was covered in dust, and the walls were filled with strange drawings that seemed to be made of dried blood. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a small room containing an old wooden table and another box. "I don't want to open this box," Lucy said, but Jimmy insisted, "We need to find out what's going on here." When they opened the box, they found a photo of the Johnson family, but the details were horrifying. All the family members appeared in the photo with pitch-black eyes, their faces devoid of any expression. Behind the photo, there was a rusty key. "Maybe this key is for the front door," Peter said excitedly. But before they could return upstairs, they heard a piercing scream. Lucy was gone. They searched for her everywhere, but all they found was her blood-stained scarf lying on the floor. The doll appeared again, but it wasn't the same. Now it held a small axe, and its red eyes glowed in the darkness. The children ran toward the upper floor, trying to escape. When they reached the front door, they tried using the key, but it didn't work. They began hearing whispers and Christmas songs intertwined with Lucy's screams. In a moment of desperation, they jumped out of a first-floor window, landing on the cold snow. When they turned back toward the house, they saw the doll standing at the window, waving at them with the axe. Then, before their eyes, the house collapsed entirely, as if it had never existed. The next morning, when the townspeople returned to investigate, they found no trace of the other 4 children, except for Lucy's scarf. But they found the doll sitting in the middle of the rubble, with a card attached to it that read, "Merry Christmas." But not for everyone. Meeting my ex-girlfriend Sarah's family during the holidays was the worst weekend I had ever experienced. Her family lived in a different state, far from Sarah and me. We were in Long Island, New York, while they were in Vermont. Our relationship was relatively new, but she thought it was serious enough to invite me to spend Christmas with her family. Her family was very small, so the gathering was just going to be Sarah, her brother, her parents, and me. When we arrived at the house, I was taken aback. The house was beautiful, sitting on a large, well-kept property secluded from any nearby houses. As Sarah and I stepped out of the truck, her parents came out to the porch to greet us. At first, they left a strange impression. They seemed friendly, but in an oddly unnatural way. Her father didn't smile, but he shook my hand, patted me on the back, and said he was happy to meet me. Her mother, on the other hand, hugged me with an exaggerated show of emotion, but there was something unsettling about her face. Her smile was unnaturally wide, almost to the point of being creepy. The inside of the house was just as beautiful as the outside, with a cozy wooden lodge-like vibe. Shortly after, I met Sarah's brother, Paul, who had just come home from work. He was an awkward guy, with an old-fashioned bowl cut and a full tattoo sleeve running up his arm. We had dinner, which was awkward at times, but otherwise relatively normal. After dinner, we gathered in the living room to watch a Christmas movie. I tried to avoid making eye contact with Paul, but I could feel him staring at me for extended periods on multiple occasions. At one point, I finally looked back at him and our eyes locked for about 3 seconds before he turned back to the TV. His stare was judgmental and intense, which only made me feel more uncomfortable. At the end of the night, Sarah and I were in the guest room, which had an attached bathroom. She went into the bathroom, leaving her phone on the nightstand. I noticed a new text message from her mom. Out of curiosity, I got up to read it. The message was completely unexpected and changed the entire tone of the night. The text read, "Do you think he suspects anything yet?" Before I could process it further, the notification disappeared, replaced by a new one, probably due to her phone's notification settings.